What is up, people? Welcome back to the Performance Playbook podcast. That is a mouthful. We're back with a new setup and a similar person. Matthew, welcome back to said podcast.
Thank you, Brandon. It's a pleasure.
So we were trying to think about what we wanted to talk about. Obviously, as you guys can tell, Matthew's going to be a consistent guest here if you like it or not, because it's fun to chat. But we were thinking about it, and the topic that came to mind was the dying art of reading. Why would you think this is kind of important, especially right now in today's age?
Well, at first when you mentioned it, I was like, that sounds boring. But then I thought about it for 2 seconds later, and I was like, this topic's amazing. Because there's so much to just our modern society and why people aren't reading. And I think we can talk about that. We can talk about the history, but also, what I study, praxeology, the science of human action. All action comes from ideas, and the best ideas are in the books. And the more you read, even like Lou Rockwell said, read as much as you can. And the more you read, the more answers you'll have, and then people will come to you for the answers.
Yeah, I think it's kind of interesting too, though, because I used to you got me into reading, and we'll run into that story at some point, which I think is kind of funny. But you can start to tell if you lean away from reading, and then when you stay fairly consistent with reading, like how your mind feels, because your brain is a muscle. And so if you're not working it, and not to say that like a video game can't work it, but I feel like you're like so high stressed while you're doing that, it kind of like fades away from what you actually feel like you can gain from reading. Do you kind of feel that, or is
Absolutely.
that just?
Yeah. No, I like to say that uh you know reading is for the mind what working out and exercise is for the body. And if you put your mind through, I mean, there's so much that's going on during reading. It's usually you're alone, so you have to be comfortable with that. It's what you're reading, how in depth and like interested are you in what you're reading? Is your mind wandering, or are you like voraciously going through with a pen and like writing notes? Like I've just let's start actually like with how we got into reading. I think that would be kind of interesting and useful. Why don't you start?
Oh
If you like.
God, mine's hilarious. Mine's funny. Yeah, so my journey began when this was probably like my sophomore or junior year of college.
Yeah, around there.
And it's kind of crazy again for people to kind of consider that. Like I literally didn't read a book fully through until my sophomore or junior year of high school. College. Before that I would cheat, just skim through like anything not to actually read the book. And it was an incredible kind of like jump in I feel like my ability to be able to sit down and like ponder ideas and thoughts. But for the actual story itself, I'll get back to it. We indulged in a little bit of marijuana. May I say that on the podcast? It's in California, so it's legal.
Of course you
Yeah.
can say that.
No one freak out. It's okay. I know it's semi-anti performance. There could be arguments made for that, but we'll save that for another podcast. But the funny part was we were sitting there and we had like well over a 2+ hour conversation, and it was solely just about reading. And I felt like I was so behind in not just like knowledge, but I just felt so behind because I'd see you run through like hundreds of books, and like the knowledge you had on, the topics that you're interested in.
That's a lot. Not that many.
Well, okay, but if you're in comparison to what I did, which was
Sure.
zero, and then I look at all of your bookshelves, it felt like you were just like, light years away. And so we had this long conversation about, why you would want to read, how you'd get into reading, and the utility in doing so. And based off of that conversation, I just slowly started. And I mean, this is what I tell the people that like teammates of mine that I will give books to and try to push them to read is like just read 2 to 5 pages a night is better than zero, and you'll notice it eventually. You could get to 6 pages, 7, 8, 9, 10, and once you're starting to hit 10 pages, that you feel pretty good, and you have a consistent kind of like rhythm with reading. But it is kind of crazy that I just kind of heard a statistic about it, but like most of the U.S. is at like a sixth grade reading level for adults, and easily I would be a part of that. And so just trying to like work my way out of the hole of not being able to like read and understand information well. Um, it was kind of a hard journey to get out of that, and a lot of it's kind of ego too. Because when you're really bad at reading, you have such a bad reading comprehension level, you don't want to read because it's like annoying. And so that was kind of my little touch was, us sitting down and being able to like understand what you were able to get out of reading. And then I started connecting myself with it and, started seeing the benefit. So that was kind of like my intro into it.
Nice. Um, well, I'll say that growing up, I was fortunate to have a dad who forced me and my brothers to read, and like it sucked. It was just not fun. But that's because I think I was reading stuff that I wasn't super passionate about. And then as I got older and I got into college, I met a professor who was showing me Austrian economics, which like sounds probably boring on the face of it. But then like when he showed me the readings and like what it was, and it's like the philosophy and theory of like sociology and civilization, and it's amazing. And then we're reading Human Action, and just trying to read 10 pages of that book a day is a challenge. And that's like a 800 book, like a treatise on economics. But it's beautiful, like when you read it. And then, he would like smell books, Professor Darren Jurgen. And I'm just like, why? And he's like, because like I just know the books, like by the smell. I know it's a good book because of how it smells. I'm like, how? And he's like, because the publisher. Like, and I'm just like, wow, like that's amazing. And then I went to Spain, and Professor Jesus Huerta de Soto, who's a world-renowned professor, he told us that books can be your best friend. You can cry in them, you can write your secrets in them. And then, like I love on Instagram, there's like philosophy pages, and like one of them's just like, there's a philosophy quote. I don't know who said it, but it's like, reading a book is like having a conversation with one of the finest minds in history. And so it really depends on what you're reading and the substance of it. You know, like, and we'll get into the history and theory of like different ideas and stuff, but I was just at a bookstore that primarily sells like novels and like fiction, and I'm like I found some cool books, and like I'm checking out, and the people next to me, this girl's buying some books, and the guy's like, "Oh, did you do this book or this book?" And she's like, "No, but I did this one." And I'm like, "You guys are like hurting my ears talking about doing books like it's casual, like one night stands with books. Like that's not how it should be. Like these things are amazing, but I get it. It's like it depends on what you're reading. I think a lot, and
I think
with the internet,
if
yeah,
I
yeah,
could jump in too, just really quickly, just in the sense of when you're reading too, I think one thing to kind of understand and start to recognize for me, it made it a lot easier to start reading once I started copying you, which was like I would look at your book and it was just like annotated the hell out of. And like you would not just like it was like you were working with the book. And I feel like if I just sit there and read, and for some people this is like exactly what they want and that works for you and perfect, that's great. But like for me that's not how it works. Like I have to be like actively reading or I'm gone. Like if I'm not
hmm
holding a pen, I struggle to like stay on point and like actually consistently read through a page. Because my eyes or my mind will start to wander because it's too ADD. So if I have a pen and I feel like I'm actually following along, it makes it a hell of a lot easier to like know what's going on and where I'm going.
definitely. And for me, with the pen, it's like the most intense books. Like it's all underlined. But not only that, I'll write notes. And sometimes if like I disagree, which like you come across books that Mises would say that it's not only important to read the books you agree with, but the books you disagree with, and figure out why. And like in it, you'll see my notes. It's like fuck you, like piece of shit, you're wrong, like this is bullshit, like don't lie to me. Like that's what I'm writing in the book sometimes. And
Maybe hopefully a little
uh
bit more intricate with it. You'll actually explain why, I'm assuming.
yeah, of course. I'm like writing like at the end of the chapter, like this dude doesn't understand like this or this.
Do you ever give
But
those books to people?
no.
Oh, shame.
I mean,
That'd be incredible to
no.
just flip to a page and see that.
I mean, maybe I have, but I'm just like it's not worth your time. Like I'm not gonna do you a disservice by giving you a book I think is like not worth your time. But I think what's interesting is again like in the modern age, why are people not reading? And I think a lot of it is because like in school we're forced to read and like it's not fun and you're graded for it. So it's not for leisure. Um but also, if you look at historically like in the Soviet Union, which books were banned and illegal to read? Well, it was like The Road to Serfdom by Hayek. You know, Mises books were banned in Nazi Germany. And I think in our age, books, it's more like the Brave New World where we just have this technology that is like TikTok brain, where it's like your ability to concentrate is so diminished that it's hard to just like get through a book, right? And it's like, and to the credit, we have so much information online and YouTube that it's like you don't need to read if you don't want to. But you know, how are you gonna ever like get into the mind of Descartes or Virgil if you're not reading their work? Like that's where you really discover so much gold. Uh, is in these old books.
Well, I think something I like that you do too, that I feel like a lot of people could try to like completely emulate, would be you set down a good amount of time every single day to read. Like it seems like it's almost like a non-negotiable. Like you almost make it like a full-time, not a full-time like effort, but like you go out of your way and you make it almost more enjoyable. You go to a coffee shop that you like, you find new locations, and so it almost feels like fresh. You're not just sitting in a corner of your room and you're reading,
Yeah.
unless that's something you like to do and like cocoon into a story or whatever. But I think making it almost more exciting externally and then going
Hmm.
down and sitting and reading could be playing
Yeah.
into that. But I think one of the big pieces in my mind when it comes to reading, though, and I do agree with like the whole TikTok and Instagram, all these things kind of pushed us away from wanting to sit down for an extended period of time and focus on one thing. But I feel like it even started before that. Like you started getting like YouTube and like even a lot of movies started moving faster paced, and you would notice that like your attention had to move at that pace. And so by the time TikTok came, it was just because it was answering a need that people had. And so I feel like being able to actually um, understand your mind and push away that, oh, I need it now, and force yourself to read for a bit by changing the external things, that's how you actually like really play into, you know, uh, the slow down pace of, we'll say, life and reading.
Yeah. As I mean, I'm fortunate that I'm doing a PhD, so it's like my job. Like I'm making it my job to read. Like that's my research, right?
Yeah.
But I will say as far as like technique of like going about reading, like I've heard Michael Malice say he reads 100 pages a day. 20 pages in the morning, 10 pages of sessions throughout the day, and then like 20 pages at night. And like that's a lot. My friend Vicente says like if you read 50 pages a day, like that's good. And I don't read every day. I would like to. I'm not that disciplined with it, but like when I do sit down, I'll have like 6 books with me, and I'll try to read like a subchapter, and that might be only like 2 to 5 pages of a book, but then I'll switch it to the next book and the next subchapter. So in total, it's like 30, 40, 50 pages. Um, And I do like going to the cafe because it's like the nice ambiance. Like the cafe is like the European salon where like discussions were held and ideas were had and you meet people. And if I see someone who's reading a cool book, I'll ask them, "Hey, what are you reading? Like, what's it about?" Um, and I think that yeah, it's sometimes that cocoon and like you got to get jiggy with it. But man, there's so many. It's all about the substance, bro. Like for real, like what you read matters. I mean, for example, like Mises said, like anyone who says read Marx, right? They haven't read Mises, and Mises would say Marx is great for insomnia. Like, so I mean, that's like and one compliment I received at the cafe the other day was we were talking about what I was reading, and it was like The Ethics of Money Production by Guido Holzman, and I got the compliment that like you read serious, intense literature, and I was like, thank you. Like that is what I'm reading. Like, so I don't know. At
Well,
the same time, yeah,
if you were to pull it out though, so like if you handed me one of those books as I first started reading, I would probably burn it just because that would be so boring. It'd be unreal. And I think for most people though, right? Like
yeah,
you have to find what like entices you if that's fiction, nonfiction. And then like really like lean into that for quite a bit. Then you can kind of venture out elsewhere. Cause like even now, if you handed me one of those books, I would probably like fall asleep midway because I don't think it's necessarily my style or my taste. But I think being able to step out of bounds and find books like that every so often is pretty important. Where would you usually have people start? Because like, how did you start when you were a kid? Like, it was probably more books that were fun.
um, yeah. I mean, as a kid, like what I was forced to read was like um there was this cool series for kids. It's like who was and then this person. Now it's like not so good. But like at the time it was like who was Da Vinci and who was Benjamin Franklin. And then it was like some baseball books and then it was like the books in high school that we had to read that I also wasn't reading. Um and then when I got into college it was just like I just had so much readings. And then I got into a class with a great professor, Dale Wright, who taught Buddhist thought. And so we were reading these books like Zen Mind, Beginner Mind by Shinru Suzuki, and like these amazing books on like Buddhist thought and Taoism. And at the same time, when I was learning Austrian economics, we start with the history of economics, which comes from the Taoists, Lao Tzu. So I'm reading like The Way, Tao Te Ching, and those books were amazing. Like just to read, because you at simultaneously get that like spiritual serenity and calmness, I think. And those really were like the gateway to get me to start reading like a lot more um was like the Buddhist thought books. Like yeah, I would start there because they're almost nonfiction. They're like poetry. They're very light, but at the same time you're like really feeling the calmness of your mind. And books are a drug. Like they're literally ideas and they're changing the way you think of the world and maybe of yourself. So they can be like almost an out of body type experience. Like you get lost in a book. You get lost in a video game and a movie. You get lost in a book,
Yep.
in
Yeah.
music.
Yeah. And so you're more so talking about someone that is in college or maybe later in high school that would start with something like that. And I think that's probably a good place to start because then it starts to actually poke at your mind on how you think, how you see the world, perspective of said world. I've read a few of those books and they are always pretty enticing and actually pretty engaging while you read it.
Hmm.
I did find this interesting, and I was going to say when it came to people reading and their individual tastes, you could even run into that difference between people when it comes to how you enjoy an author's style of writing.
Hmm.
And my example here, which you're probably going to laugh, is Michael Easter, The Comfort Crisis. Yeah, exactly. I read it and I enjoyed it, and I think it's maybe because I liked the story behind it, but as if people are watching Matt's face, he did not enjoy it. Why didn't you enjoy it?
I
And
couldn't
then
get through, dude, because I'm coming from reading like Carl Menger, writing his book Principles of Economics in 1871, and it's like this very like, you know, era where Europeans were like actually educated and like numerous fustel de Cologne in the ancient city, talking about like ancient Greece. And it's like, I don't know, that book for me just like rubbed me the wrong way because the like I'm just not into that. And that's okay. Like you enjoyed the book. That's great. Um yeah, I tried, bro. I got like maybe halfway, bro. I really tried for you.
what didn't you
It was so
specifically
it was
like?
so infuriating. I didn't like it just felt very redundant. I didn't know what the point of the book was. Um what I like is very analytical stuff. And then he got into like modern politics and like, you know, the moralization of certain things that I disagree with, and I was just like, yeah, bro, okay. I'm sorry, but I wrote in the book like fuck you, like you know. So yeah, that's I just didn't like it.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think maybe that's the interesting part too is everyone is so individual. I liked his writing because it felt like well, maybe I understood the message behind it. And it was kind of a basic message of getting out of your comfort zone and pushing yourself to do things that, you wouldn't necessarily do. Obviously, he was coming from being an alcoholic to going out and hunting. Like, it was a very cool story for me that I saw kind of like shift and change. And I don't know if that's because like
Hmm.
I necessarily started to feel that change myself, not because I was an alcoholic, but because I was making changes in my life. But I think that's the exciting part is you can connect a lot of what you are doing now with what people have written in the past. Similar to like Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, it's like that was so long ago, and you still see the same problems again and again and again. And so it's like, we've changed and we've become more advanced in technology, but like we still have all the same problems, the ego and all of these things that kind of always affect humans. And you can find all of this in different books. And I think that was the
Hmm.
part for me that was like pretty exciting because that was like, for example, that was a step out of my bounds for reading because I was like, like I don't know if I'll enjoy just this kind of like older dude writing about his thoughts, but actually being able to digest what he was saying and talking about his life experiences, you're like, damn, okay, like it's actually really interesting. And it's kind of crazy to see that this emperor, one of the most powerful men in the world, was having like everyday regular people problems that we have. And so, stepping out of the bounds is kind of a good way to do it. But my whole point here is I think there's a good I think it's good to read a wide variety once you've gotten consistent with that because you can find out like you hated that book. I liked it, but you hated it. But you'll never know what you really necessarily like or want because if you stay in one track or you kind of hide away from it, you won't be able to experience and start to understand all of these little
Uh,
pieces.
yeah, I'll say two things to that, right? Like, and I think you've experienced the same thing where it's like, there's certain books that like you're just not either ready for or you're not like they're not for you at that time. Like everyone enjoys different things, right? And I have a bunch of books that like I'm looking forward to reading, but at the moment they just don't appeal to me. But I know in the future like I'll be in a state of mind where I'm like, "Oh, yeah, this is very appealing." And perhaps it could be something like that, like The Comfort Crisis or other books. And Aurelius, that's a good book. And I wanted to mention um yeah, like a lot of times I'll go to like Barnes and Nobles and the books I look at, I'll just go through the table of contents. The Mises Institute has a good bookstore and that's like a lot of the books that I have. But like, it's unfortunate that a lot of books have become politicized, right? It's like why doesn't Barnes and Nobles have a collection on Austrian economics? It's because their whole economic section is socialist. it's I look through the contents and it infuriates me. But like you can pick through it. You know, I can tell you which books have zero substance to them. There's a lot of words, but the ideas are not founded on anything. And so that's why I'm like I don't really read novels because they just like I'll read some Ayn Rand, but like they just don't appeal to me. Like I'm like involved much more and I get more pleasure from reading some like, you know, intense economics. um
I do think
yeah.
that's interesting too because it pushes me towards something that Naval Ravikant said, and he was talking about how he used to read all the way through a book because it was kind of like an ego thing. Oh, I finished this book and I finished
Mhm.
these 50 books this year. Look how great I am. And it kind of
Yeah.
becomes this big ego thing, which I experienced at the beginning because I think you're just kind of excited that you've been, reading books and you're starting to feel
Yeah.
more of an intellectual kind of state of mind. But he doesn't even finish books anymore, and he'll skip chapters sometimes. And I think it's kind of about the purpose of understanding what you're reading. And it's kind of what you're saying. Like you can tell if a book sucks just by the table of contents, or even just like skipping through some chapters and seeing what the content is quickly. And I kind of like that idea, and I actually have put that into play for a few books. When I got to like the second to last chapter, I was like, I've read everything, and now we're starting to like re-skip over the same idea, and that's when you start
Yeah.
to lose me. Is when we get like really redundant and repetitive. Like, I mean,
Like
similar
the
to what
comfort
you said,
crisis.
like the Comfort Crisis, yeah, which they did talk about the same uh, principles a lot, but just in different ways. Don't fall asleep on me, but yeah, I think it's very interesting to kind of notice that. But I do think there's an important piece to finishing a book when you first start, even if it's kind of bad.
Well, maybe. No, I disagree. Um I did that last year, bro. I was like, okay, let me keep track of all the books I finish and all the pages in them. And like it became this thing where I'm like trying to just finish a book for the ego rather than like study a book. Like my friend Alan told me this years ago. He's like, like this is like a French perspective that Americans are like so afraid to like not finish a book or like pick it up again. Like that's how a book should be. You could like just read one page. My research led me to just like finding which chapter of a book I need to read and just read that chapter and then like put it down. And then it's like you have to like Human Action I come back to all the time. Even Mises, his own book, he would reread it like all the time. And because there's like certain subchapters you want to just discover and learn about. And every time you read a book again and again or a chapter or something, you will learn it in a new way and you'll interpret it in a different way. And so it's like there's something to that of just like having a book to have. Some people have Human Action, Man, Economy, and State just on their bookshelf, just as like a trophy, not even to read. Some people won't read it, but like I recommend to read it.
Yeah, I think those books too are so important to be like really, really enticed with keeping them as close as possible, especially when um you get that much value from it every single time. Like I'm not a big fan of just storing up as many books as possible. I feel like it's wasteful, and I'd rather give them to other people. And then if you like that book, give it to someone else. Um,
Hmm.
but like those books that you can consistently go back to are like very important. Like I have a Thomas Kurtz, like the science behind stretching, or I forgot the title of it, but like that book I consistently go back to retouch on ideas on how I can work on mobility more effectively and efficiently. And so there's like books that you find eventually that you can just run through, and every time you go back to it, you find something deeply important to you that kind of like sparks something. And obviously, it's like meditations is a great one, and people say that consistently. I think I've gone back to it twice now, um, and it's a very interesting touch to kind of reread it, almost feeling like it's like slightly different for the time that you read it. But there's been a few books like that. I wouldn't say the Comfort Crisis. I only read through that once.
Uh, um, my favorite movie, V for Vendetta, and you watched it recently, but like his home, the Shadow Gallery, like I love the shots of the room where Evie is waking up and it's just covered in books, like stacked on top of each other to the ceiling. And
Yeah.
it's just like the wall. You can't even see the walls. It's just books. And it's like, to me, like, I aspire to have a home like that where it's just filled with books, filled with art. And I think it's something more to do with, honestly, like, that guy was alone. He had no friends. He lived alone, and so he would just read and read and read. And I'm sure he didn't read all of them, but that's what he felt like he needed in his home was books and art, because it's all history, and it's the things that will connect him to the world, um in, like, separated from time, throughout time. And even, like, Michael Malice says he owns a copy of every book he's ever read. And so I know you think it's wasteful, but, like, for me it's like I'd want to sleep and be buried in these books.
I wouldn't say it was not wasteful, but it just gets overly cluttered. But
But
I
you're also a
do.
minimalist.
I like
I,
having less things for sure. Yeah.
I like the concept of maximalization.
Well, I do think, especially like the books that I value. Like I think there's a reason why I want to get rid of a book. And like if I
Uh-huh.
didn't feel like I can consistently go back to it and get value, then I don't really want it in my collection. But
Same,
I'm
same.
fine if it fills up a whole room if I have that many books. But like I have to
Yeah.
feel like the need to be like, hey, I think I could read this book again this year, or I can like get some value from this chapter
There's
this
something
every
in
so
it.
often.
For me, if a book's that bad, I'll get rid of it.
Yeah, yeah,
It's just
yeah,
I don't want it. I don't want it in my life.
yeah. Yeah, so then like I kind of feel similar. Some books that I've read once and I feel like been, I've gotten everything that I could from that book. I don't know if I necessarily feel like I need it around me, especially if I can give it to someone and they can get more value from it. And then you can kind
Yeah.
of consistently lean down and go through you know, that
Why does
whole
it have to be a leaning down? Like, why do you
sorry,
look at it like
no,
cleansing?
like you're passing it down. It's nice to pass
Uh-huh.
down information. So, being able to give your books to other people is kind of nice.
It is, but I've also heard, uh, if you ever give out a book, don't expect to have it returned.
Yeah, which I
And,
get.
like, I have, like,
Yeah,
yeah, I have an emotional connection to some of these books where I'm like,
yeah,
if I have another copy of it, I'll give you that copy, but, like,
yeah,
you can't have this one. This
yeah.
one's mine.
Well, one I like to give out that was made recently is Green Lights by Matthew McConaughey.
Hmm.
Kind of a cool life, cool experience, and it kind of just like opens your eyes to like how you could live in a more free way, and like his way of thinking is kind of cool and exciting. And it's
Hmm.
easy to connect to because he's here right now. And so that's one that I give and expect back because I like to give it to people that are around me that maybe haven't read. And I'm like, hey, this is an easy one. There's pictures in the book. It's fun because he's a funny guy. He's got really cool stories. Like, you know, read this, lean into this a little bit, and let me know what you think. Because
Hmm.
that was one I almost read in like 2-3 days, just because it was kind of like a fun story to keep following along. So it depends on the book, but I like to kind of like I guess the reason why I said pass down is you're passing down that information, and it's a fun way of minimalizing for me, especially if I don't like the book, maybe someone else will like it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Huh.
I think the other piece that I think um, I was kind of sitting on too is the difference between our childhoods when it comes to reading. And I think the big part here is for me, it was like so heavily pushed athletics. And there was hey, reading's good, but it was never like pushed upon us. Yours was a little bit more um, pushed upon you, not necessarily forced, right? But like, you
No,
read.
that's forced.
Oh,
It was you can't do anything if you don't read.
really? Okay. Yeah. So like my parents, I would see my parents read, um, specifically my mom, pretty consistently. She led by a good example. My sister read, but I didn't. I didn't ever read. I don't think I really cared for it, but I think it was because of just so ADD. I needed to move 24/7, and then I was kind of introduced to video games pretty early, and I never had that forced time of reading. And to be honest, that I kind of think that isn't a terrible idea. I think it could be done maybe in a less forceful way. But like, what was your experience with that? Like, did you eventually kind of like that time to read?
No, I never. No, no. As a kid, it sucked. It was grueling. But it helped me develop the strength to read.
Yeah.
And so when I got to college and then I began to enjoy reading, I was like capable to just like run with it. What was funny was my little brother, who was like actually enjoyed reading and was a voracious reader, to the credit of Marga. Um, he then when he was like growing up and was forced to read, he could read so quickly that that he was free. Because like even my dad told me, he was like, he reads so fast it pissed me off. So I think my dad enjoyed that, like, enforcing reading on us. But like, I don't know, my little brother read like all of the Harry Potter series in Spanish in like 1 week. Just like, no, he's a and so then I don't know, like, I just got into reading, and then like now my dad doesn't tell me to read, but I'm like always reading. And so like it's cool because it's like uh, it's cool.
Yeah. So then the question based off of that is, how would you change it to where you think it'd be a hell of a lot more appealing for kids, for your kids specifically? How would you change that?
I think if you take a kid to Barnes and Nobles, like, or like not even Barnes and Nobles, but just anywhere where you can find books and they can find books that they, so, for some reason or another, appeals to them and they get kind of excited about, like, try to help them read those books. Um, I think that you just got to be excited about like what you're doing with anything. And when it comes to reading something that's already kind of can seem daunting and intimidating, if you can find any excitement in whatever it is, do that. Cause there's something to reading, man. And I'm sure there's like neuroscientists who like do research on reading and stuff like that, of like the effects of reading, blah blah blah. But it's like a spiritual thing for sure. When you just, bro, I was thinking about this and I'm not sure that we should mention it, but I kind of want to mention it. It's kind of dark.
Go nuts.
Should we do?
Yeah,
Okay.
go nuts.
Okay. When I was my senior year in college, bro, and college more or less sucked. Other than Professor Jurgen. But anyways, I just was like listening to music and like some like heavier music. And I don't know how, but I came across this genre of music called D DSBM, not to be confused with BDSM. But DSBM is a genre of music. I'll leave the listeners up to Googling it if they want. Anyways, I came across this genre of music and I'm like going, I was like, okay, let me find a playlist on YouTube. And so I find this playlist and I'm like, what the fuck is this? And I'm like reading the comments to be like, I need to know what people think about this. And one of the comments was, if you read Emil Cioran, who's a Romanian philosopher from the 20th century, if you read his work on the heights of despair while listening to this music, you will have a transcendental experience, like a drug. And I'm like, okay, I'm gonna try. And I did it, bro. There's a PDF online. And honestly, bro, he's like to put it simply, he's a like a pessimist philosopher. And man, that book really changed my life. And it's really influenced me because right now, my research, my PhD thesis is the economics of suicide. So it's like like I really enjoy finding niche bookstores, and there's one in Sedona called Alt Books, and you won't even know it's there. Like it's like hidden, like behind a tree, up a stairway, like it's pretty hidden. But some of the best books I've ever read and found were from there. Anyways, I was just there the other day, and I found this book called I haven't no, it's in my room, but it's the no, it's here. The Enigma of Suicide.
Mm,
And
okay.
so, man, it's crazy. But like, there's that. I've read Durkheim's book on suicide, which is considered the first sociological work was on suicide. Anyways, so Ciaron's book, On the Heights of Despair, when I read that, and I read it all like in just like that night at like 3 a.m. It's not too long. But it made me realize that like I could never kill myself because it could always be worse. And it's just this pessimistic perspective that you just apply more pessimism to your situation to basically, extend it to infinity so that wherever you're at goes back down to zero. Like to I guess like make that like mathematical analogy where
It's like
I
two
don't know, it
negatives
really,
equal positive type of thing.
yeah,
That's
kind of thing.
okay.
Like you make it like if you think you're in a negative situation, basically just think about how it could be worse and like make it infinitely worse in your mind so that where you're at is just closer to zero, closer to neutral. And it really I don't know, it kind of fucked me up, so I don't recommend it for everyone, but like it really neutralized myself um to life in this strange way where like yeah, I was just like just yeah, man, I don't know how to like explain that. But that's like the power of books. It's like they will change how you think about the world. And that's the power of ideas. Ideas are the basis of all human action. Why are wars caused? Why do people do certain things? Because of the ideas they have. They think, it will lead to better outcomes for themselves, right? So it's like that's where books come from, Cameron.
Mhm. Yeah.
Um,
Well,
and
I do
so yeah.
think it's kind of interesting that you bring that up because when it comes to I think bigger times in my life and being able to shift how I see things, I started gravitating to books, and because it was such a perfect time to like meditate and think, and then to understand someone else's kind of like way of thinking at the same time. It kind of quiets. It kind of puts on like these nice little horse blinders that just kind of like ease you into working on your mind. And I think that was one of the beauties of books that I've been able to get out of is, being able to like have a great way to meditate on what's happening as of like now.
Definitely. I mean, if I'm ever doom scrolling, like I'll feel like sick, both mentally and physically, but like more, my cure is to like just put the phone down and like pick up a book and
Yeah.
just get lost in the book.
Yeah.
Like it
And
kind of like, yeah,
I do feel like the being able to push away your phone and like funny enough, like minimalize your phone on how many things that you can have to distract you. And then just like care. One thing I was doing this for a bit, and I fell away from this. I was doing it for a couple weeks, but like anywhere your phone went, a book has to come too. And it was kind of
hmm,
an interesting way. It's like you give yourself the choice. You're like, okay, I do have these two options, and I can either choose to read or choose to do the doom scrolling and see kind of where I fall. And that piece
yeah.
was always like super interesting.
I know that the great Professor Ludwig Mises would say like, men, you're probably gonna date and get married to a woman, and you're gonna be waiting on her quite often. So always have a good book with you. Thought that was
Yeah.
funny.
Yeah. And so I think just the moral of this whole podcast was just to if you don't read, which is actually funny enough like a substantial amount of people, and
Yeah.
it's kind of like it hits a larger base of people than I feel like most people that would expect. But I think finding a book, a physical form of a book, is kind of the best way to go because again, like you can read on your phone, you can say you're reading if you're on Twitter, but the problem is it's just like very small doses of information, and it kind of leans into that like quick now instead of like kind of not forcing you, but like reframing and reteaching your mind to just like slow down.
I mean, dude, the great books that I've read, that you've read, that are out there are not on Twitter. I mean, you may find a PDF if you're looking for it, but if you're just on Twitter, like you're bullshitting that you're reading. You know what I mean? Like, what are you like, what's the thesis of this Twitter post? Um, no, books are like they can be, as Puerto de Soto said, your best friend. Can
Yep.
write your secrets in them. I
Yep.
mean, That's powerful, bro. They're a spiritual thing.
Yeah, 100%. Well, with that being said, I thought this would be kind of more fun as a kind of just shorter touch of a podcast. Hopefully, this staticky noise that I'm picking up, people are not picking up also. But yeah, great podcast. I think it was a fun little topic to touch on. Hopefully, people don't freak out that, I endoused in a little bit of weed. But once again, thanks for joining. And
Bro, they
well,
don't know what else you did.
what else did I do? All right. Well, thanks for
I'm
joining.
trolling.
And we'll probably cut it before that, hopefully. But peace.
No, leave it in. Leave it. Peace.